Chapter 22 The Cave. When he came to, the first thing Daniel was aware of was the pain. It was a familiar, throbbing agony that originated in his left arm and washed over him in waves. The second thing was the cold. This being November, there was a chill to the evening air, but this cold bit like a deep winter freeze. Rough stones scraped against his face. Air smelled wet, like earth. Daniel stretched his fingers out into the darkness. There were none of the faint shadows or telltale shapes that you might find in a dark room. This was a darkness that was total, absolute. Daniel brought his good arm up to his face and waved his fingers in front of his eyes to confirm his worst fear. He was blind. "Do you know where you are?" asked the darkness. Daniel froze and listened to the voice, rasping like crinkling sheaves of old paper, a voice he knew and feared. "Plunkett?" Daniel asked. "Yes, Mr. Corrigan." The voice was close. He could be standing right over Daniel, and Daniel wouldn't even know. "I can't see." "I know, but you haven't answered my question. Do you know where you are?" "How can I know where I am if I can't see?" Daniel heard Plunkett, real Plunkett this time, not the muffled whisper of the shroud, give an exasperated sigh, but Daniel didn't care. He was focusing all his might on keeping the panic out of his voice, even as the encompassing darkness threatened to swallow him whole. He was fighting the claustrophobia brought on by the blindness and concentrated on keeping his breath even, steady. "You have other senses," said Plunkett. "You have deduction, reasoning as well. Now I repeat, do you know where you are?" Daniel forced himself to relax, and he stretched out both arms into the dark. Instantly he regretted it, as a burning pain raced up his bad arm. Plunkett's attack had undone weeks of delicate healing that had gone on beneath the cast. The bone had snapped a second time. He winced, but he managed not to cry out. "Ignore the pain. Fight through it," said Plunkett. He reached out again, this time with only his good arm, and felt the ground he was lying on. It was definitely stone, cold and rough. He could hear the slight echo of dripping water nearby. "We're in the quarry behind your secret stone door." "Very good. And do you have any thoughts as to what else might be behind my secret door?" Daniel gritted his teeth and forced himself to breathe. What was Plunkett up to with all these questions? Was he just playing more games? Toying with his prey? At least this game was buying Daniel time. Every minute that he kept Plunkett talking was a minute Daniel stayed alive, and increased his chances of finding and freeing Eric. So he buried his anger and fear, and let his deductive mind get to work. "I suppose that is something you want to keep hidden, something important to you." "Yes." "And before this was a quarry, it was the site of the St. Albans orphanage, wasn't it? Before it burned to the ground. Before the night the comet appeared over Mount Noble. Call it by its real name, boy. Mount Noble is a meaningless honorific. The ancient tribes who first settled in its shadow called it by a different name, Witchfire Mountain. Noble had nothing to do with the secrets of this ancient place." There was a sudden change in Plunkett's tone, a defensiveness that hadn't been there before. So, Jonathan Noble was a sore spot for the old man. "But otherwise, your deductions were splendid," continued the darkness. A top-notch bit of reasoning. Daniel's vision exploded in a field of white, of shooting stars. It was more than a blindfold being ripped off his eyes. It was darkness itself, peeling away from his eyelids. The pain was excruciating. When his vision cleared, his now tender eyes focused immediately on his adversary, Herman Plunkett, the shroud. He was sitting across from Daniel in a very different chair from the overstuffed recliner in his library. This one was made of stone and earth. It appeared to be dug out of the very cave wall. Plunkett was playing with a strand of darkness, the same cold darkness that had just been peeled from around Daniel's eyes. It was thin, like a fine filament string, yet fluid, ebbing and flowing between Plunkett's fingers. There were other strands of the stuff here and there, about Plunkett's body as well. The remains of Plunkett's villainous shroud disguise. Plunkett merely watched as Daniel examined the rest of his surroundings. As he'd expected, he was in a limestone cave. Daniel felt the cool wind of a draft upon his face. A kerosene lantern provided feeble light, enough to see by at least. but the shadows swallowed up everything beyond this small patch of light, so there was no telling how deep the cave went or how tall its ceiling was. Daniel could see well enough, however, to make out Eric's body lying a few feet away. His friend was breathing softly, easily, but was unconscious. Behind Eric was a small alcove, into which was set the massive rolling door that Daniel had seen from outside. It was, of course, sealed tight. And the walls were covered in pictures. They were etched and stained into the very stone. Scenes of battle, of hunting, and worship. The artwork was primitive and reminded Daniel of the cave paintings in Europe he'd seen pictures of at school. These paintings were better preserved, though, and in most places the color was still vibrant, the detail remarkable. These paintings had been hidden from the elements and from prying humanity for many years. Behind Plunkett's chair was another kind of mural, a collage of photographs, a collage of photographs framed and hung with care from the rocky wall, like family pictures in a hallway. Such a modern affection looked out of place in this ancient cave. They tell the story of this mountain, said Plunkett, gesturing to the painted walls. This place had stories many thousands of years before our ancestors walked its forest. We are such a funny race, humans, compelled to scratch our lives out in ink, on paper, or rock. Whether it's limestone wall or the pulp pages of a comic book, I suspect it's hardwired in our DNA, the urge to record our lives. Daniel said nothing, but he thought about the drawings that lined the walls back at the tree fort. Generations of extraordinary children who scribbled down a record of their lives in pencil and crayon. As if reading Daniel's mind, Plunkett pointed to the framed photographs behind him. These are my humble contributions to history, a wall of remembrance for those who came before, my wall of would-be heroes. Daniel squinted at the photos, and though it was too dark to see any details from where he was lying, one thing was certain. They were all pictures of children, generations of children. So you collect, what, pictures of your victims from over the years? Victims? Hardly. I saved each and every one of these children. I saved them from themselves. So, we are in Mount Noble. I mean, Witchfire Mountain. Yes, Plunkett smiled, resting comfortably in the belly of the beast. That turn of phrase sent a chill through Daniel. He didn't like to think about resting in the belly of anything. And what about my friends? Daniel asked, remembering the sight of their bodies strewn about the ground. Are they all right? They are fine. They are a bit stunned by my grand entrance, but no permanent damage was done. In fact, I believe they are on their way to rescue you, even now. Daniel let go a sigh of relief, with its greatest fear that his friends had been hurt or worse in the confrontation with the shroud. Interesting move, recruiting the Cudgeon's boy to use against me. Here I have taken away your king, said Plunkett, gesturing to Eric's still form, and you go and move one of your pawns to replace him. That took first-class strategic thinking. Plunkett leaned in close, his creepy smile wide. Do you play chess, Daniel? Yes. Good. I'm glad my metaphors, at least, aren't wasted on you. Wasted on me? What are you talking about? You kidnapped me, attacked my friends. Daniel knew that he might be pushing it too far. He feared the anger lurking inside the old villain, but he couldn't stop. These games have gone far enough. Why don't you end all of this? To his surprise, Plunkett just smiled. You are burning with questions, aren't you? Always the detective, even to the bitter end. I like that about you. Very well. Ask away. I will indulge you with an answer or two. You will find that I can be generous when it suits me. Ask. Okay, then. Who are you? I mean, really, are you Herman Plunkett? Or the Shroud? Where does Herman end and the Shroud begin? Plunkett said. Is the Shroud Herman's secret identity, or is Herman the Shroud's? Plunkett chuckled, and Daniel squirmed at the sound of that laughter. There was a frayed edge to the old man's voice that had been well hidden until now. So everything you told me was a lie. You lied to me and framed Eric for it all. Not everything was a lie. I told you what you needed to know, and fed you to the information that suited me and my purposes. It's true that I used you to turn your friends against each other, but it was necessary, I assure you. The special children of Noble's Green were no match for my power until you showed up and began uniting them against me.